We're here for another Insight conversation at the ATL Education Expo with DevonVictoriaHagos, the Director of Talent at the Kindezi Schools here in Metro Atlanta. Devon, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you, Ian.
I'm really excited to chat with you because one of the biggest challenges currently in education is around teachers, recruiting them, retaining them, developing them, giving them pathways. And I know you have a lot of experience in that. But first, I'd love to start by just hearing a little bit about your background. How did you get into education here in Atlanta? And what are the different roles you've served in along the way?
Sure. So I actually come from a family of educators, so that sort of began my interest in the field of
Yeah.
education. But I'm a non-traditional teacher, so I started actually as a theater major at the University of Southern California, and then
Wow.
yeah, very different pathway.
Yeah.
So I sort of knew that I was interested in education and also arts. So I decided to join the Teach for America program and was a 2012 Metro Atlanta Core member. And through that experience, I still found that I was using a ton of creative strategies, whether it's theater and education or other strategies to get kids creating and using the arts, no matter
Yeah.
the kind of area that I was using. So all that integration just kept sort of feeding into my work as a classroom teacher.
Gotcha.
And the opportunity presented itself at the Kindezi schools to become the director of specials and studios,
Hmm.
which was an administrative role overseeing arts classes, STEM, PE, entrepreneurship, just a plethora of classes that, again, allowed me to tap into that creative,
Gotcha.
that creative space. And then that was my first introduction to recruitment. So I was recruiting to lead that program,
Gotcha.
which was itself a creative endeavor,
Right.
trying to figure, how to navigate attracting people who would fit both what the education space wants and have all those content area skills related to
Right.
those subjects I named. So that was my role immediately before director of talent.
Gotcha.
And now as director of talent, I recruit for all positions at the Kindezi schools, not just those for arts, but for financial controller, data analyst,
Yeah.
all
Everything.
the way down to principals, assistant principals, everybody.
Awesome. That's super interesting. So I want to go back to when you started teaching. What was the age group you started with?
Fourth grade.
Gotcha. Okay. And it's funny, like when you first say like a theater major, now becoming a teacher, obviously those aren't the same thing. But then any of us who've been a teacher knows that there's certainly a lot of theater involved, right? There's a lot of, putting on a good face, trying to be engaging. What were some of the things that you pulled from that theater background when you were actually the lead teacher in the room?
Well, I did definitely put on that face in terms
Mhm.
of, whether or not I'm actually extremely excited about the War of 1812. Now it's my time to, put on the show. We're
Yeah.
ready for
Yeah.
the War of 1812.
Right. Right.
So there was that. There was a lot of, reading activities where I would have students do dramatic readings as opposed to just kind of reading prose on the page, which
Yeah.
they really enjoyed. Read alouds are a lot of fun when
Hmm.
you're an elementary teacher,
Right.
and especially when you know how to do kind of that inflection. Kids just get really excited about it. So.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so, can you tell me more about the program you directed? You threw out a couple of different subjects. It sounded like you had to recruit for. Can you just tell me more about the program as a whole? Because you said a couple of things in there I didn't even realize, like Kindezi does and people are doing. I'd love to hear more about that.
Sure. So the Specials and Studios program was started in 2016.
Mm.
Um, the Studios program is the after school arm, but every school has specials. So specials are those, special subjects that kids go to, the art, music,
Oh,
PE
okay.
classes that are typically there. Yeah.
Elective
So
for
overseeing,
yeah.
yeah.
Gotcha.
I was overseeing those kind of traditional specials and then a few that were kind of going into more of the 21st century skills direction. So we also offer entrepreneurship and we
Mhm.
offer team lab and computer science. Those are the three that typically we get like an
Right.
from
Right.
folks who are Kindezi. Yeah.
What is you said the second one was Lean Lab? Is that what you said?
STEAM lab, sorry.
Lean Lab. Okay, okay. What does entrepreneurship look like for a fourth grader? You know, like what's that, or whatever the grades you were teaching it at, or
So entrepreneurship, we use the Venture Lab curriculum. So Venture
okay.
Lab has a very comprehensive written curriculum detailing both the mindsets and the skill sets of an entrepreneur.
Mm,
So it's everything from how do you show curiosity? How do you show persistence and grit?
right,
What does it look like? What are those like mindset things? And then also getting down to like, what does it look like to build a business plan? So from the start of, what's my idea? What problem am I trying to solve? Down to how do I pitch?
right.
All of those are skills that a fourth grader can totally do. I mean,
Yeah,
they have
yeah.
a ton of ideas.
Huh,
So it's just figuring out how to give them the language to talk about their ideas and how to persevere through when it's really a challenge or when they don't know.
right. Are there any ideas that you can remember from the students that really were like out there, or like, wow, that's actually a really interesting concept? What's the first one that comes to mind?
Uh, for a student in entrepreneurship
Yeah.
or any of the subjects.
Oh, either or, but I'd really love to hear if there's some wild, crazy business idea that a fourth grader might come up with, or an elementary student.
So one doesn't necessarily come to mind. It's been a little over 2 years since I had that role.
Yeah.
So off the top of my head, there's not one that really jumped out at the moment. But I do still work now tangentially with Venture Lab, the organization itself, to
Okay.
help write curriculum. So I'm hoping to participate in some of their pitch events virtually in the coming months
Cool.
um, to get more engaged with fourth graders, hopefully, as well as older students around
Right.
entrepreneurship.
Right. And after I was a teacher, I was with an organization called Next Generation Men and Women, and we had we would do little entrepreneurship competitions sometimes, and kids always have all kinds of different ideas. And there's, pretty exhaustive research that kids are way more creative than adults, and your creativity starts to go away over time. Um, but it's fascinating how much entrepreneurship specifically has taken hold of like our culture now that it's actually a course. But I think those mindsets, to your point, can be extremely valuable no matter what you're doing. So I'm curious, as you switched over to the talent role and you were looking for folks who can teach those subjects, like how did that affect when you first doing it for the specials? How did that affect your approach? And then we'll talk about more broadly what it's been like overseeing all of it.
Gotcha. So I was always thinking about the competencies that a teacher needed to have, having had that experience. And I didn't mention I also taught drama for the Kindezi schools as a
Oh, cool.
special, um,
Got it.
but just not as a full-time teacher. That wasn't my primary role, but I sort of like taught it at the end of the day. So I had
Right.
that like lens to think about what does it take in order to do that.
Yep.
And then I also had the idea of, well, what are the outcomes that I want to see from this teacher? And then that made it much easier to determine, okay, during the interview process, have you done those things? And if you haven't
Mhm.
done those things, then how could we make this as crystal clear to you as possible,
Right.
what we are expecting so that you know what to deliver? Whether that's, we want to see an art gallery, like you're the visual arts teacher, that's one of the things that we need to see.
Sure.
Because it's not the same for every school. For some schools, it's just facilitation of art classes, and they're perfectly fine with that. So
Right.
making the outcomes super clear, regardless of the content area, sitting down and having that conversation. Then moving into core subjects, it's essentially the same thing. The outcomes are very different,
Right.
but the idea that we need to have a conversation now about what this should look like for the end of the school year is very it's just very transferable regardless of role.
Yeah, I'm curious about that because a topic that's been coming up recurringly in some of these conversations is this idea of like, how do we define success for students and teachers? Are we even setting time aside to clearly define it? Because I never had a good conception, was I in the classroom, about, oh, this is what success looks like at the end of the year, aside from, I guess, every kid gets an A. Like that would be amazing, but that's not really like a definition of success in reality. So I'm curious, like as the director of talent, what's the do you guys have internal conversations at the leadership team level about like, all right, here's what we're really looking for, and then where do you take that, like, what do you do with that information to kind of translate and transform it into something that's helpful for you as you recruit?
Sure. So we absolutely have those conversations. We talk about our goals at every meeting, literally leading into every meeting.
Yeah.
And so for our students' data, our goals are always to focus on both year over year growth and
Hmm.
then students showing mastery and success regardless of the subgroup that they may belong to. So
Gotcha.
that kind of equity piece.
Right.
So both of those being our academic goals are discussed all the time in our network, both at the network or central office level
Yeah.
and at our schools. So then the recruitment side of that really just looks like figuring out how do I screen for that? How do I find a teacher who has done that before
Right.
or has so either having them bring some data that they've accomplished previously
Right.
or having them talk through what is their entire process and like a hypothetical type of question, those
Mhm.
types of things. And then as well, we require every single one of our teachers to complete a demo lesson. So
Gotcha.
during that demonstration, we get a sense of, if they did this every day for an entire school year, are we
Mhm.
going to make the types of gains that we're looking for?
Right.
And are they able to identify like, what would your benchmarks be if you weren't making that progress, those types of things. So
Gotcha. Is there,
it's definitely,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's definitely been an interesting creative task to try to figure out how to translate that throughout the process from every single stage.
Right. I want to dig into that a little bit more. It's like, I assume the candidates you see are all over the map in terms of experience, style, personality. So when you're thinking about that, like, because there's no one perfect right way to be a great teacher. Right. So how do you like sift through somebody's maybe stylistic or personality traits when looking at, are they a fit for what we're looking for?
That's a really great question. And I think it really comes down to what the organization's culture looks like. So Kindezi's got a very specific culture around joy. So we want to see joy in terms of your enthusiasm around the content. It doesn't have to look the same. In fact, it shouldn't look the same. Like a kindergarten teacher who steps in front of middle school students and does what the same
Yeah.
exact
Yeah.
feel is a flop. They're going to see through that as like inauthentic and it doesn't
Right.
work.
Right.
So I guess what I try to do as much as possible is to look at, is the enthusiasm there? Because that's what's going to help the teacher not only pull the students in, but continue to stay motivated.
Yeah.
If you're not motivated to get the students excited, then you're also probably not going to be motivated to stay in this profession, longer in order to have long lasting impact for our students. So that's
Right.
cool. I'm never recruiting someone with the idea of like, oh, I sure hope they stay till the end of this year. Like, I'm
Right.
hoping they're going
Right.
to be a great fit that'll stay for many years.
Now, you mentioned, like, I imagine talking to or interviewing somebody with no teaching experience, a brand new teacher, it's very different than someone with experience in the classroom. Do you have a preference, ideally? And because I imagine, I'll just put it out there, as a former teacher myself, having worked in education too, I imagine that you always would prefer to have a veteran, great teacher to come to your school than a newbie. But that obviously isn't always the case. I'm curious how you guys think about that. Do you specifically go for one with experience over no experience, or is there other ways you kind of try to mitigate that or take that into account, I should say?
I would say there's actually a sweet spot. So if you're focusing on folks who are just coming straight out of college, then they're going to have a lot of theory, but not a ton of praxis. Um,
Right.
will make it really tough for them the first time they encounter some of those situations that just school doesn't prepare you for. Now you've got an assembly happening in the middle of the school day and you're like, no one told us about this, what's going on?
Right.
That's just the reality of working in schools that college just can't prepare you for. So that's not ideal. It's also not ideal to have a teacher who has so much experience that they've kind of lost some of that growth mindset around it. So they're
Mm.
not as ready to learn and engage with professional learning or collaboration across working with other educators. So it's not necessarily that either of those will be true, but that's sort of like the
Right.
leaning of either of those categories. So the sweet spot is, I would say, around 2 to 3 years of experience, where you know enough about what it's like to actually work on a day-to-day basis in the classroom,
Right.
but you're still eager to figure it out. Like, you don't feel like you know everything yet. That's where I think we see the most growth and the most happy teachers in our organization.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So obviously, like the elephant in the room when it comes to teachers and talent is the fact that there's a teacher shortage, right? I think applications for teacher prep programs are down like 30% over the last 10 years. We know that a lot of teachers aren't sticking around past 3 to 5 years. So how is that impact? How do you see that impact in your own role day to day? And then also thinking about like, what are ways we can start helping to get more enthusiasm back around teaching?
So I think when it comes to what we require of teachers, we have to be really honest with candidates, whether it's while they're in their educator preparation program, excuse
Yeah.
me, or while they're in the classroom, about what we expect of them, and then to provide the sustainability and the self-care space that's
Mm,
necessary. So one of the ways I've seen that work really well at Kindezi is we have instituted a partnership with the I'm blanking on their names. Um, it's a group that's in Atlanta.
hmm.
Um,
While you're looking for it, what do they do for y'all?
oh, Restore More. Why didn't I think of that sooner? Restore
Sure,
More.
sure.
All
Yep.
right. So Restore More was contracted to actually build out a lounge space in the Kindezi West building. That's not like just a typical teacher's lounge. It's like low lights, it's really comfy chairs, it's a place to completely disconnect from whatever is happening in the classroom, to just reset.
Yeah.
And so we have those types of spaces that we're building out, in addition to just spaces for teachers to talk through what's going on in the classroom. I know trauma-informed teaching is a thing, but also understanding, the impact that that has on you as an individual, as a teacher working in
Right.
these spaces, and then providing a supportive culture to talk through those issues, and just providing a joyful culture. Schools, I know we focus so much on what's challenging in education, but there's also a lot of really invigorating work that happens
Yeah.
in the classroom, school. So trying to find as many opportunities for joy to balance out, the really challenging and heavy parts,
Right.
that really makes a difference in a person's overall work experience, I've found.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I mean, we have such maybe it's a deficit mindset or whatever it is. Why do you think that is? Why? I mean, because you're absolutely right. We all feel it too, right? Like it's very easy to sit back and just rip on the system, which I myself do plenty of. But we don't focus on all of the great stuff, like the great things that happen, the great people involved. Obviously, just like building community in a community in your school building. Um, why is it that we always focus on the negatives? Just from your humble opinion as a director of talent here in Atlanta.
Yeah, I think the main reason that we focus on it is because education is just held up to such a high standard of what we're expected to do. When we think about, everything that's happened in our country in the last year around diversity, equity, and inclusion just being a huge factor in every industry, not just education, but in every
Right.
industry. In education, it looks like just really taking a look at, have we set up our kids for success outside of the classroom? And is education really responsible for fixing every single problem that
Right.
is
Right.
facing our kids in society? And so I think that the more we really come to terms with overall what equity means, and not just placing that solely on the shoulders of the education system, then it can become more sustainable and more exciting work. But if I come into the classroom because I have this heavy load on my shoulders of, if I don't teach this student to read by third grade, then what does that mean for them for their entire educational and life trajectory? That's
Right.
really heavy. That's really heavy. And I don't
Yeah.
think that it's fair to put it on the shoulders of teachers solely.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I mean, I remember feeling it myself. I had a decision one time with this student of mine who had already failed world history once previously. I was teaching 10th grade world history. She was a senior, and it was the only credit she needed to graduate. And to be frank, she really didn't have, she did not put the work in to get the grade. And that's for all kinds of reasons, right? Many of which I don't even know and couldn't even appreciate. But I knew, at least based off what she had turned in and done, she was not at the passing grade. And then you're sitting there as a single teacher by yourself in your room who teaches world history. Do I drastically alter the future prospects of this student based around this world history course, where honestly a lot of stuff I teach her is not necessarily super important for her life? And I feel like a lot of us find ourselves in those positions, and because the national conversation is the way it is, it's always in a very negative light too, right? I'm curious, how are most of the candidates that come to y'all, do they have experience, or do you guys get new teacher candidates just as much?
We get new teacher candidates. We actually have a partnership with the Create Teacher Residency,
Okay.
which part, yeah, they work through Georgia State University and send us some really great candidates actually who have a focus on how to keep this work sustainable, how to you know, work through and model great SEL skills as a human, and making sure that you're okay first before you go in to work with students.
What a novel
Um,
thought.
yeah, I know, right? That teachers would need that.
Yeah.
So we do get those teachers, and I feel like they are exceptionally well prepared, um, compared with other teachers that we've seen who may come just straight out of college without a lot of that context.
Right. Right. And the other thing I want to ask you about recruitment, is most people don't really think about the sort of the operational and business side of schools. And if you're trying to fill positions, you obviously need to market for those positions, right? You need to put the information somewhere. What's that like from a school perspective? Like, do you guys do marketing? How do you talk about that? Or is it more of just like, well, people know who we are and we try to be seen, but we don't do much more than that?
No, we definitely have to do marketing. Um, I have to focus on how to attract the type of teacher that we're looking for, since we are looking for something so specific.
Right.
Um, and then I'm also looking for folks who are focused on our mission. So our mission is our primary vehicle for marketing messaging.
Right.
So helping folks understand what we mean when we say Genius Awakening Education as part of our mission,
Mm.
and then what family-sized classes look like. So even when people hear about Kindezi and they hear about family-sized classes, a lot of the time it takes a good marketing campaign to show what that looks like in practice, because all they hear is, you have how many kids in a classroom, and they don't really understand, well, this is what it means for our teachers. It actually means more work, because we're going to ask of you so much more to differentiate for those students. We're going to ask so
Sure.
much more of you in terms of parent communication for those students. We're going to ask that you really know those students on a personal level, and that your relationships with them are much stronger than they would be if there were 30 students in your classroom. So
Right.
um, I think the marketing for us is more so around clarifying those points of our mission,
Mhm.
but it always drives directly from our mission, who we are and who we want to be.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you feel a competitive aspect of recruitment when you're thinking about the other schools in the area? Because I know, just from the district perspective, right? Like when I was hired by Fulton County Schools, and everybody, it seems, knew that Fulton County was the second highest paying district at the time. I don't know what they are now. APS was still like held the top rank. And that was one big thing. And then, at the beginning of every year, I feel like there's always some article out there about like, which districts have teacher shortages still? Like, what are the teacher shortages? And so I'm curious, like, how is it pretty cutthroat out there? Like, what's that competitive nature like between schools and systems?
It can be competitive, but I think being competitive is only helpful. Just like being competitive in other industries is helpful. It actually
Mhm.
helps us to step our game up and to make sure that we're providing the best possible like staff experience and work experience for
Right.
folks that we're attracting. And then it also just helps us to continue to enhance our employee value proposition. Like this is what we will offer you for coming to work for us. And I think otherwise we would get complacent. Otherwise we would think, well, what we're doing is fine, so we'll just keep doing what we're doing
Right.
versus focusing on, this is something amazing that I've seen somewhere else, and we could integrate that into what we're providing for our staff and our students and our families. And so, I mean, by the nature of being a charter, we often look around and say, like, how can we innovate and make this better?
Right.
So we do that. We do that also in terms of our staff experience for our roles.
Gotcha.
That's my answer to that. I don't know if it fully
Yeah. No,
answered your
I
question.
get it. I mean, it's definitely competitive, right? Like you want to get the teacher you want, but it's not competitive in the way it's like, oh, we want to make sure that school down the road fails. That's obviously what we're doing. But it is, teachers are a scarce resource, becoming more scarce. And especially when you have class sizes that are not like your typical 30, 35, probably need a few more teachers along the way anyways. Okay, so
And
I
I
want to go for it.
um, just to say, I definitely get disappointed when teachers choose other schools over
Teachers.
ours,
Yeah.
but I say that that's such a deeply personal decision that oftentimes you can't take it personally. So that's
Right,
it.
right. Yeah, that's a good point. All right, so my last question for you, thinking about the importance of teachers, the sustainability of the profession, and the different things you mentioned around recruitment, and even some of the subjects you mentioned that you guys were incorporating through your specials. What do you think 2050 in 2050 education should look like? We're trying to get folks to do a little backwards planning here. So if we could have the ideal system by 2050, which gives us 29 years, give or take, what do you think it should look like? It can be broad strokes, be very specific, whatever really comes to mind for you.
So I think there's this idea that specials are this separate place, this separate space in education. So what I would like to see by 2050 is just the pace of integration to really pick back up,
Mm,
um, and for there to be a lot more conversations around some of those entrepreneurial mindsets that I mentioned. How do we get kids to think really broadly and interdisciplinarily about curiosity and about how they can build a better world for themselves and for future generations? So I don't think that it's, any kind of one pathway that allows that. I see that with STEAM, which is currently, gaining more traction. I see that with entrepreneurial learning, which is gaining more traction. I see that taking place already. So I just would hope that by 2050, it's just kind of gone in a more broad direction and sort of seeped into every part of our education system. I know 21st century learning is huge, and so collaboration is not going anywhere. Especially we've seen just how incredible collaboration has to be thanks to the pandemic. So I absolutely would say that by 2050, I would expect that we're just building on that critical thinking for students and giving them really juicy questions to answer and really exciting problems to solve because they already exist. And so
right.
just figuring out ways that we're recruiting teachers who are ready to do that work, and
Mhm.
that we're providing students and kids with the opportunities to awaken the genius that's within each and every one of them.
Well said. Says it's a good way to close. I very much appreciate you taking the time, Devon. This has been super interesting. And hopefully we're taking that first step in the right direction for 2050. Because the world's got a lot of complex problems and we're going to need every mind we can get to help solve them. So thank you so much. This has been great. And thanks for everybody watching for the ATL Expo 2021 Insight Conversations.